Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. For a thorough conversation on how Tire Tag can help your agency in revenue collection, visit episode 204. That's 204. There are so many factors that impact the well-being of law enforcement officers, from wellness topics and developmental content to organizational expectations and social connections. RippleWorks solves that problem by providing anonymous check-ins, so each officer can get exactly what they need and want for prime performance, while agencies learn in real time how their people are doing through analytic dashboards. Take a look at RippleWorks today at www.rippleworks.com and schedule a demo. That's RippleWorks, WORX.com. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode. We frequently talk about all things with the job and culture, leadership dynamics, but then also the brass tacks of doing the job. And so frequent themes come up in just general performance, and with that, standards and professionalism. And what are the things that we want new cops to be able to do? What are the things we want to be training new recruits, prospects to be able to plug and play into this job that is so critical? There's so much that goes into training and the nuts and bolts of how to do all the nuances and skills with the career. However, when we take a step back, we think about character traits, skills, just abilities when people are coming in. So for that, we're going to tackle a lot of this huge topic in standards, professionalism, and performance. And with that, I have Jeff and Bill joining us today. So I know this is going to be a fantastic conversation. Why don't we start with Jeff? Please, if you could say hello to the guests and to the audience, and please just tell us a little bit about yourself, your law enforcement career, and what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
My name is Jeff Wenniger, and I retired just last year after 33 years in law enforcement in Los Angeles, primarily with the Los Angeles Police Department. Retired as a lieutenant, and I'm currently the founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants. And I'm the author of a forthcoming book that actually is being formally released on next Tuesday. It's called On Thin Ice. So, my career with the LAPD, I saw a lot of change and turmoil and cultural issues that we had to address, having been under a consent decree and a DOJ investigation. I ran the Rampart Gang Unit after the huge corruption scandal there. I was involved in the adjudication and actually wrote the adjudication for Chief William Bratton that was submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners, who are the ultimate adjudicators of those cases. And then I ultimately ended my career as the officer in charge of the detective entity that investigates all officer-involved shootings. So I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly. I've had my hands in over 700 lethal force cases. And, I'm happy to share some of my experiences and insights relative to those types of critical incidents.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. And certainly an extensive career. The listeners can definitely hear all those things. And I'm sure regardless of your level of experience, even if you're listening in and you haven't actually gotten the badge or gotten sworn in, you'll hear all those things and recognize how they apply directly to the conversations we're going to be having today. So thank you so much for that crash course, Jeff. Bill, I'm turning it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I had 22 years in law enforcement. Started my career actually doing maritime law enforcement in the Coast Guard Reserve, and in civilian law enforcement. Started with a small rural agency in California on the Central Coast before moving to Idaho. In California, kind of rang all the fun out of the high adrenaline side of law enforcement, doing K9 and SWAT, all that kind of stuff. But then when I went to Idaho and kind of took a different track, went more the supervision and admin route, as we were talking about earlier, wore all the different hats, being in a smaller rural department, and oversaw, the hiring and the training, doing the professional standards stuff, but also ran our jail for a while, ran the operations side of the house for a while as well, and left law enforcement in 2014. And actually, my doctor took me out of work because the toxic leadership and my own poor self-care was taking me out, and have transitioned, went into the corporate world, worked for Lexipol for almost 9 years, helping them build that team and the professional services side of the company. And now I'm a leadership coach focused on mostly emotional intelligence and personal wellness to improve people's emotional intelligence and their overall wellness.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. I'm stoked. So, there's so many places I want to start, but let's just start with a frequent conversation, which is standards. We see a lot of headlines. It's actually generated a lot of commentary and really healthy discourse on LinkedIn. A bunch of people in the space commented on it, and I believe you both have been part of some of my posts or kind of responses to other people's posts on hiring. And we can look at the headlines. I mean, you mentioned Lexipol and Police One. I think it's so relevant for people that are in the industry to know what's going on in our policing culture industry, news, and all the facets there. But when we talk about standards, and we'll stay away from physical standards because we've talked about that a few times, but there's so much more than that. And so when we see the headlines, there's so much conversation of lowering of standards or injecting different standards. Let's call it that. So I kind of want to see where both of you are at with what comes to mind with regards to trends, and potentially we can take it to what your personal concerns are with that. With your extensive history, we hear some professional standards, some hiring background, some interaction with reforming units, right, following corruption. So all extremely relevant. Why don't we start with you, Jeff?
Well, I don't really look at it as a challenge of hiring the right people. It's about implementing the proper hiring process. So I think what troubles us in the United States is that we really don't have a selection process, so to speak. It's a deselection process. As long as you don't have a criminal history, you don't have an extensive history using drugs, and your finances are in order, you have a decent chance of getting hired by some law enforcement agency. And there's been success elsewhere, in this world. If you look over to the Nordic countries, you look at Norway, Finland, Iceland, what they do and how they hire. It creates an environment where you're better able to identify whether the candidate has the characteristics that I believe everybody would suggest are important for an officer to have in order to be successful, especially in today's modern policing era, where I would suggest that law enforcement has really struggled to keep up with societal expectations of them. And we need to evolve and maybe move outside of this insular mindset of how we do things. The reality is, here in the United States, there's no national standard for the length of an academy. Each state sets that for themselves. So you have Connecticut that is on the high end. It's about 9 months of an academy. And then Hawaii has no standard. So it's all over the place. But the average is about 800 hours. And if we put that into context, and it's rather embarrassing if you think about it, to apply for your cosmetology license, you need 1,500 hours of training. And we're going to put somebody out there to handle the type of stressful, rapidly unfolding tactical situations where they're making split-second decisions with only 8 hours of training. And the training that we have is just very surface. And I think that's really the challenges that we have. I think there needs to be a blend of diverse experiences that people bring to the job. Whether you have a law degree or you have a military background or you're college educated, I think it's very important that we have that type of diversity among our ranks, because I've always encouraged what's called creative encounters, and you have to have internal and external conflict, where you have differing opinions that are at the table discussing these critical issues, because it's never about being right, it's about getting it right. And it requires that you're open to suggestions and perspectives that are very different than your own. And, some of the greatest lessons I learned during my 33 years were from people that weren't actually in law enforcement, but that had some great ideas about things that could be implemented. And it's about breaking outside of our insular culture and looking elsewhere, not only in law enforcement, but in the private sector on how better to do things, whether it's strategies to reduce crime or it's how we hire, how we train, what level of education that we find desirable. What does it look like when we're providing people with additional higher education after they've gotten on the job? Because I would also suggest that oftentimes, I've even taken part in it, where you go off to get a master's degree level course and you're sitting in a classroom with a bunch of cops. And so it's a siloed mindset. It's really a group thing. You're really not being exposed to thought processes that are, could conflict with yours. So you're losing what I would say is really a great opportunity to expand your thought process, and we're almost narrowing it. So these are all kind of the challenges that I see, and I'll relinquish at that so we can talk maybe more granularly about each one of those. But I'll pass the baton to Bill, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. That is a really good outline, and I took some notes, and you could hit on so many things following a lot of those prongs. One thing I do want to turn it over, and we can definitely open up if you have other thoughts, Bill. But on what you said, Jeff, about the deselection process of hiring, and I think I agree with a lot of that. Like conceptually, right? You start with this pool, and you just have you have these hoops or these restrictions or standards and whatever you call them, right? Where you're just like, okay, you're out. You're just kind of whittling this big block down to what ends up being like, and sometimes like a little little twig at the end. You're like, all right, this is what I got left. But what we're doing there by virtue of the process. Bill, what are your thoughts on that, especially coming from the hiring perspective?
Yeah, Jeff makes a great point. It doesn't matter, how many hours you have. Some industries have tons of hours, but it's like what you're teaching in those hours. Making the most of that time that you have and what you're focusing on. And the deselection process has been our default in this industry. It's like you said, Eric, we started with this huge pool of people and we start eliminating people based on certain criteria, how many push-ups they can do, how many chin-ups they can do, how fast they can run a couple miles, versus looking for the people that we really want and then putting them on the track to create the type of employee that we want. So it's not so much of a selection process, it really is a deselection. And, as Jeff said, the diversity of thought and perspective is how any great team is built. All the teams I've ever been a part of, whether it was, SWAT or in the corporate world, the most effective teams I ever operated on were people that had different opinions, different perspectives, and they came from different walks of life or just, different histories. And we need to start enrolling that into our law enforcement too, because if we all go in and we're just looking for this narrow mindset, we're going to start getting what we're getting. It's a very non-diverse group of people that are kind of one-trick ponies, if you will. And then we have this uphill battle of training them to become the people that we need them to be. One of the things that I've told people forever, that when they come to me, especially the younger people thinking about getting into law enforcement, they want to go get a degree in criminology or criminal justice. I always told them not to. Like, we're going to train you how to be a cop. Like, we'll teach you that piece. I want you to go do something else that you're interested in. Focus on business or psychology or go into biology or chemistry or tech, right? Because once you get into law enforcement, there's all these different avenues that you can go into and specialize in that are so much more valuable than just that strict cop mentality of, like I said, how many push-ups you can do or how many sit-ups you can do or how fast you can run a mile. You're only going to do that every so often. Like, are we really looking for the right people? Because we're gonna find what we seek. We're limiting our perspective in the hiring process when we're doing the recruiting and the vetting process. Like you said, we end up with, we used to have like about a 55% washout rate or better in our hiring process. And then agencies get, especially these smaller rural agencies that I worked with a lot when I was with Lexipol, yeah, we were working with them on policy and training stuff, but we would hear all their stories, and a lot of them like, what? I just need to fill the slot. So naturally, they lower their standard because they just need somebody with a pulse, right? They can just meet the minimum standards and get through the post academy, versus looking for those people that they really need and then build them up to what they need for the long term, right? For that long term retention, we have a huge retention problem in this industry too. That all starts back in the vetting, right, in the recruiting process.
Yeah, you said a lot there, and just by happenstance, the timing, and probably with the release, having done a conversation specifically on hiring with Tom Sy and Tim Kusarovi, but it just to talk about like recruiting and how that plays right into your culture, right? And like it's intersects with leadership and like retention, all these things. And we're talking about selection and then training, right? So it's almost like the follow-up step and recognizing it's all the same things, right? And so if you try to fix something with this quick fix, let's get someone in a seat. It's a roll of the dice. We didn't deselect him for big enough things. Not super great, but we're just going to see how it plays out. I mean, we are creating these potential long-term downstream effects of what is that person creating or not creating, and then how is that affecting the rest of the culture? Is that making other people be like, man, you're hiring this guy or this gal? Like, I'm not about it, right? I'm going to go to an agency with standards, or I'm going to bow out. And we've seen a lot of that. And so I hope that everyone recognizes like these are really big things, and they do have this ripple effect that can be pretty monumental. Jeff, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the real key is we need to appreciate a number of things when we're considering hiring. First, like I said before, it's experience. We like people to bring experience to the table, and I agree with Bill. Whether it's a business background or it's a law background or what have you, that is something that you bring to the table, and that can be used to basically maximize the organization and law enforcement. But then you also have to look at the training, which is very important. And training is the skill set. Do you have the skill sets to actually competently do the job? And I would suggest that, truth be told, if you look at us nationally, law enforcement is abysmal at properly training their personnel. We don't put people out there that are going to be successful in those moments where it counts. I've always said we don't get paid as law enforcement officers to do what we do on a daily basis. We do what, God forbid, we might have to do. And if you're not trained to be able to be successful in those circumstances, then you're not earning your paycheck. But is it your fault? Oftentimes it's not. It's the organization's fault. Only 1% of law enforcement agencies require their officers to fire on the range monthly. Only 1%. And 25% don't get any training in shoot, don't shoot type scenarios. So then you put somebody into a rapidly unfolding tactical scenario who's making a split-second decision. They probably can't even tell you that's Graham versus Connor. That's the Supreme Court ruling from 1989 that they're going to be judged in their decisions in their application of force. I mean, that's like not knowing what a spark plug is if you're a mechanic. So we don't even do a very good job of training our personnel, to be honest. And I came from the LAPD, which does a fine job, comparatively speaking, but boy, there's all kinds of improvements that can be made there as well. And then there's the educational side, because I truly believe and want law enforcement to be a profession. So what pillar dictates something being a profession? Education. Education is what separates something from being a trade or an occupation. And law enforcement needs to be treated more like a profession, because education, it's not necessarily going to dictate your ability to perform the task. That's training. Education is your mindset, how you view things. Are you open to new ideas? Do you have empathy? Are you a critical thinker? Are you a problem solver? Are you self-aware? That kind of stuff. These are the kind of characteristics that we're looking for from people. And education can provide that, whether doesn't have to be criminal justice. It could be, you can go to pre-med, you can do whatever. Because, look at NYPD. The Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism is Rebecca Weiner. She went to Harvard, graduated undergraduate, magna cum laude, and went to law school there and graduated high honors as well. And she's a civilian employee and has been named the person in charge of probably the premier intelligence counterterrorism entity in the world. And so if we're not going to be hiring and bringing people into our organizations as sworn officers that can elevate to that level, then we are going to see law enforcement filling these positions by people that have these educational backgrounds that have never worn the badge and handled the radio calls, see the man, see the woman, and have walked in the same shoes that everybody else in the organization has. So, there's arguments for all of it, but, education, then what does that do? Does that eliminate a number of people that would be fine officers? It perhaps may. I mean, these are the struggles that we have to work our way through. And like I said, if you look at If you look at Norway, they have 3 years. You get on and you have to go through an entire program, which is 3 years long. It's equivalent of getting an undergraduate degree, but you also get all of the tactical training and firearms training and pugilistics and grappling and defensive tactics, all those things. But what happens during that period of time? You're being evaluated. You're being watched. Do you exemplify these characteristics that we know are necessary to be successful in law enforcement? And are you open and responsive to the training that you get? Because it's not enough to give training. You're not going to learn anything unless you're open to receiving that training. And oftentimes people aren't. And what's the other thing that we've done in law enforcement? Everything's e-learning these days. I mean, de-escalation training, they have it on e-learning. What I do is I've seen a number in civil cases where officers are being sued, and then their depositions, they admit to, yeah, I received that, and I just clicked that I read it, and I never read it. I wasn't aware that that was a mandate that I had. And so the organization is not just providing the training. That's fine, but you have to do your due diligence to ensure, one, that it's actually being received, and then two, that the outcome that you're looking for, that something has been learned, and it's creating a behavioral response that you want, that they're going to act in accordance with this training when they're in real life situations in the field. So, we're challenged on all these levels. And it's a huge mountain we have to climb. But we just can't sit here and say, as everything evolves and the expectations continue to get more and more difficult to meet, we can't stay in the place we are in. We need to look to success stories internationally and implement those here in the United States.
Yeah, it's you hit on so many points again, and I want to focus in on one piece that you both have talked about, which is this diversity of candidate slash team member, right? And so it's diversity of thought and experience is one of the biggest things that I hear both of you saying, and we all recognize that. I've said many times, joking to my groups, but not really joking at all, to say, hey, if we had a police department of just me's, just Eric's, we'd be an utter disaster. If we had just a police department of Jeff's or Bill's, right? Like, and I do this with my sergeants sometimes. I'm like, that is the point. When we get together and we bounce things around, and the conversation of problem solving gets way more complicated and messy than until it actually starts to iron out. Like, that is the process. But it happens so much better when you have people with all these different insights and experiences, educations, as you put it. And I love how you kind of describe what that can look like, so that you make this well fleshed out team, right? We don't want a team full of quarterbacks. It doesn't work. We need people with diverse skill sets. But it's almost like we're having these dualities for some listeners. Is like, okay, I hear that you're requiring more, or you're inviting the conversation of requiring more, but then I also hear that everyone's experience could be different, right? For some people, going to college was something that they didn't expect they could do. They got opened up to a world of new ideas and perspectives, a whole different industry to consider. Maybe it's psychology, maybe it's math, and they have this amazing brain for financial crimes and things that I should not partake in. At the same time, you have potentially people that are hearing this, and we've seen these candidates, right? When in our professional roles, where they checked the box, right? They went on the ride along, but they weren't engaged. They went to school, they got a degree, but C's get degrees. And so what did they actually learn? Like, how did they actually develop themselves? And I think that's where I hear both of you saying, okay, what are the character traits and qualities that we want in our people? And also we want to see them build that in themselves when we select. And also we want to be sure that we are investing in attentively building those things, not passively, not checkbox training, not go to the range twice a year for qualifications, just to show that you're not going to have this really unsafe, uncouth shot, but you're just hitting this non-moving target. But we could apply that metaphor to a lot of things that we do in policing, and you spoke to one of them as far as like the online training for de-escalation, or right, that kind of crisis management. Bill, what does that drum up in you?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack around this. One of the things is, I always think about this buddy of mine's dad, back when I was in high school. Says, yeah, the problem with some people is they're educated beyond their intelligence. And education only goes so far, right? I had a buddy that trained his Chihuahua how to find marijuana. Like, how useful is that, right? So again, I think it's going under the standards, like what we want in our employee and finding the people that I think Jeff hit on is like the people that have the aptitude to do the job, right? And one of the ways that agencies can not only attract better people or the more of the right people, I should say, and then take care of their retention problem is to get underneath those standards and start looking for what really is the quality you're looking for those in those applicants. And then how you can get them on board and build them up to what you need in your department, right? Like you said, Eric, you might be thinking, you know what, we're seeing an uptick in these types of crimes. Therefore, we need to start looking for people that have more of the aptitude to do this kind of work. We tend to play a game of like we're always looking back, we're always reactive versus being proactive. And you know, we can look at history and kind of figure out what the future is going to look like. But I think when it comes to the training, you know, people can. Jeff hit on a really critical point that people need to keep in mind. You can have applicants that present to you and they've got an MBA, you know, they've got a master's degree. But I can tell you from working in the corporate world and being the hiring manager and building a highly effective team, I've seen people with master's degrees that I scratch my head and go, who the hell wrote this guy's papers?
There are so many factors that impact the well-being of law enforcement officers, from wellness topics and developmental content to organizational expectations and social connections. RippleWorks solves that problem by providing anonymous check-ins, so each officer can get exactly what they need and want for prime performance, while agencies learn in real time how their people are doing through analytic dashboards. Take a look at RippleWorks today at www.rippleworks.com and schedule a demo. That's RippleWorks, WORX.com.
Because what I'm seeing in their application, you know, and we had a pretty strict process where they actually had to do some writing and show us their their abilities. And I would scratch my head wondering who wrote this person's capstone project. Like, how did they get their master's degree? I've seen people with PhDs that same thing. I'm like, how did this happen? I mean, did they go to a document mill and get their PhD? I literally looked some of them up to make sure that they had legitimate degrees. So people can get that degree, but then they have to have the aptitude to do the job, right? And that's what I think these other organizations like Norway, right, that have more of a national police force, and you know they have, you know, when you come out of high school, you go into the military in Norway, right? So they have a very different culture, you know, nationally, and we don't have anything close to that. We don't even have national standards for law enforcement, right? The closest thing we're getting to is IADList, right? The Association of Post Leaders, and they're starting to, you know, level set a little bit. But again, how do we go find the right people and then apply the right training to get them to where they need to be and build the future of our organization? And even if they don't stay with us, right? Maybe, you know, I used to tell my people all the time, one of my jobs as a leader is to help you get to where you want to be. So if you want to be the sheriff and I can help you, I can give you the lift and I can get you there, fine, that's great. I'm going to take pride in that. And that's part of my job as a leader. I'm a lieutenant, but if you want to be my boss, that's great. But if somebody wants to go to another agency, like I had buddies of mine, even in California, working for a smaller, you know, sheriff's department in the Bay Area, and they would go to other agencies like San Jose PD or what have you, and they would go to larger departments, and it's a very different culture. So the people we're training for to work in a sheriff's department, right, where you need to have the gift of gab. If you're working in a small town, you know, Podunk PD, somewhere out in the middle of Oklahoma, or you're looking for even a sheriff's office, like I said, in California, where your cover units 15, 30, 45, maybe like where I was in Idaho when I finished my career, my closest cover unit could be an hour and a half away. If you don't have the gift of gab and you don't have the interpersonal skills to talk your way through a scenario, you're probably not going to survive in this career. So again, it's looking for what we need for that role in that organization and then building them up and training them up, but also realizing sometimes you can't get some people to where you need to be, and maybe they need to go work for a smaller police department, right, where their cover unit is 30 seconds away, right? When they call for help, they get 15 units showing up. So it's really looking at from agency to agency perspective, like what are you looking for? What do you really need? But then there needs to be that core set of standards or qualities, I should say, in each applicant that we need to do the job. Empathy is a huge one. That's why I'm such a huge fan of emotional intelligence. There's a reason that organizations across the world are not only vetting new applicants, but also internal applicants for promotion for their emotional intelligence. If you don't have emotional intelligence, you're not developing your emotional intelligence and focusing on that, then your career is likely to flatline.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.